Buongiorno, ben ritrovati al Wired Fest. Quello di cui parleremo oggi, e in questo slot in particolare, è un tema di grandissima attualità in questo periodo. Se oggi aprite un giornale o un sito di news, probabilmente troverete una notizia che tratta di hacker. E se ne parla moltissimo di hacking in questo periodo per diverse ragioni. Si parla di hacking di Stato, si parla di sicurezza informatica, di device connessi che vengono hackerati a scopi malevoli. Ma si parla anche di hacker in connessione alla politica. Se pensate alle elezioni americane, si è parlato tantissimo di hacker, si è parlato di hacker in relazione alla campagna di Macron, in Francia e via dicendo. E questo è dovuto al fatto che l'hacking di per sé è evoluto e si è connesso sempre di più all'informazione. Vi leggerò ora un elenco di organizzazioni che sono state hackerate negli ultimi anni e proviene da un articolo della nostra ospite. Stratfor Intelligence, che è un'azienda americana di intelligence, un contractor del governo, il governo siriano stesso, Hacking Team, un'azienda italiana che produce software di hacking, il direttore della CIA, John Brennan, il partito di Erdogan in Turchia, Colin Powell, John Podesta, il Partito Democratico Americano e da ultimo Retina e FlexiSpy, che sono due aziende americane che producono software. Quello di cui vi parlerà la nostra ospite oggi sono Public Interest Hack, ovvero atti di hacking compiuti per il servizio pubblico e in connessione all'informazione. Ve ne parlerà oggi Gabriella Coleman, che è forse, anzi senza dubbio, la più importante e attenta studiosa del fenomeno dell'hacking. È docente presso la McGill University in Canada e tra le altre cose è autrice di questo libro dedicato ad Anonymous, che è stato tradotto in italiano come I 1000 volti di Anonymous da Stampa Alternativa. È davvero un onore e un piacere averla qui. So please welcome Gabriella Coleman.
Thank you. Thanks. All right, well, first of all, thanks for that great introduction and for Wired for inviting me here. I'm just going to kind of jump in. So if anyone has been paying attention to the news in the last year, you know that hacking and a very particular type of leaking has been in the news, both in the United States, where we had a hack against the Democratic National Convention, and also on this side of the Atlantic with the hack against the candidate Macron, now president, and the leaks of his email. Now, what I want to claim here today is that this style of hacking and leaking is historically new. So first, let me start with a basic definition of what I mean by a public interest hack. To define it in its simplest terms, a public interest hack entails computer infiltration for the purpose of leaking documents with political consequences. Now, this is a little bit vague, so let me define it a little bit more, because it's important that there's not simply a hack, but a hack with documents, and that the documents themselves become of public interest. This does not mean that they're in the public interest. This does not mean that something good is going to come out of the documents. It simply means that the documents are important enough that journalists start picking them up. So what I'm going to do for the rest of the talk is, first of all, briefly say how this style of hacking and leaking is different from former types of both leaks and hacks. Why is it that it only came into being very recently between 2007 and 11 when all the conditions materially, ideologically were in place for it to occur before? And then if there's time, I'll talk a little bit about the implications. Now, just for the kind of punchline of my talk, really why it came into being only recently and who's responsible. Well, Anonymous, the hacktivist collective, very famous for political activity since 2011, basically experimented with this format and did it enough times in 2011 that it kind of got out there and stuck. It's a little bit more complicated than that. But really, they helped stabilize the form. They did not help invent it, but stabilize it. And also, really important precondition was WikiLeaks as well. And they were important because if you have a massive amount of digital content like email, where are you going to put it? It's not easy to host this material. So WikiLeaks and also the Pirate Bay became important places to host large amounts of digital content. But really what's fascinating is that Anonymous was not even really trying to bring into being this strategy. They did it accidentally, as we'll see. Now, one other important qualification is that currently this tactic comes in two different forms, and I believe there'll be more forms later. But basically, you have the hacktivist example, where a hacker who suspects wrongdoing breaks into a company, gets the email, puts them online in the hopes that that information will expose corruption. Then we have another kind of group, an unknown source, maybe a state actor, North Korea, Russia, who is dipping into this tactic not for whistleblowing, but nevertheless, there could be public interest information that comes here. Now, for the hackers in the audience or watching, especially on the live feed, whenever I kind of propose this thesis, there's a lot of skepticism. And I think one of the reasons why is because hackers have been hacking and releasing stuff for a long time. So very briefly, what don't I mean by the public interest hack? So very, very briefly. So black hat hackers, and I don't necessarily mean criminal hackers, I mean simply hackers who break into systems. There can be criminal black hat hackers and non-criminal black hat hackers, have for a very long time, in the 90s, 80s, 2000s, have broken into systems, have taken data, but sometimes they just didn't share it. It was a trophy. Sometimes they shared it, but it was revenge. I'm going to go after you and your group. And basically, as one hacker who was involved in this scene put it, when I interviewed him, he said nobody cared about that shit back then. Journalists were not really on top of things like they are now. Also, some targets were a bit too niche-y, too narrow for general interest. And this is someone who was really quite involved in this sort of revenge hacking. So again, people were releasing documents, but it wasn't picked up by the public. Now, hacktivism also has existed for a very, very long time. And this is a hacktivist strategy, but other hacktivist strategies have existed in the 80s and 90s. And these include things like a website defacement, where you tear down a page and leave another page, or you delete files, that's sabotage, or you do a distributed denial of service attack, right? These are not the categories I'm looking at. And then finally, a really, really important hack leak is when a hacker hacks into a company and gets passwords and credentials and email addresses. This is in the public, or becomes in the public interest insofar as it showcases bad security, and there's stories written about that, but the data itself isn't the basis for journalistic stories. So I'm excluding that category. All right. I believe Philip very briefly listed a bunch of them. Here are 13 examples from 2011 to present. I believe there's probably others in the non-English speaking world or others that were not picked up by the international press. But these are kind of the big ones, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but you could see that there's quite a few. Let's compare that to 1990 to 2011, where I have found 4 only. And in fact, the first one was a hack against the Church of Scientology, where the information was leaked to activists. But you know what? The hacker never even told anyone he hacked to get that. I found this out recently by digging. And the reason why this then is not included is because no one knew he did it as a hack, and so the form could not replicate. It could not be propagated. Okay, so again, I think this is amazing because nearly all the pieces were in place before 2007 for this to have happened. First of all, There was whistleblowing as a known phenomena. This is Daniel Ellsberg, who released the Pentagon Papers. People knew that you could release documents for whistleblowing. And again, hackers were hacking for a very long time, entering into systems. But somehow the two weren't put together for a while. So how did we get here? Well, first of all, it's important to note that prior to the digital era, did people break into places to get documents to whistleblow? They did, but it happened very rarely because, as you can imagine, it's not so easy to break into a place, truck out a lot of documents, and not get notice. But there is a fascinating case from 1971, the Citizens Commission to Expose the FBI. A group of activists broke into an FBI field office, and they took just boxes and boxes and boxes of files late in the night. They got away with it. They were never caught. There's a brilliant movie called 1971. I recommend it. And what was important about this is that it did expose a massive, massive surveillance program against every single type of activist in the United States, from Martin Luther King to the Black Panther to the feminist movement, and it helped stop it. But as you can imagine, it's hard to break into a brick and mortar establishment, so there's only a couple other cases like this. Now, before hackers were breaking in to take digital documents, there's two precursors that I think are important. And they relate to a voting machine company called Diebold and the energy giant Enron. I'm only going to give one example because of time. These weren't acquired through hacks, but people kind of dumped digital information online that was important. And the reason why these two cases are important is that it makes apparent that such digital information might be out there for the taking, and they signaled that releasing digitally hosted or digitally compiled data, like emails, could serve a democratic function. So in the first case, a woman in 2003 was concerned about voting machines. She did a Google search, and she found emails and documents related to a company that showed these voting machines were insecure. And so she took them, she published them, and there were many stories. So this was, again, important, but it wasn't until 2007 where anonymous hackers who were in a feud with a racist radio host called Hal Turner basically hacked into his show, took his emails, and they showed that this guy who's a big racist was actually working for the FBI as an informant. And then you have basically not so much news stories, but you have websites publishing information about this. So this is the first time that I can locate in the English-speaking world. The next year, a young hacker hacked Sarah Palin, who was then running for president, in the hopes of finding information that would be damning. He got the emails, but he didn't find anything damning. But it shows that hackers then were starting to think about this. But really, it was only with Anonymous that this form really starts to take off. And this operation was very important in kind of bringing this into being. Operation Payback was in support of piracy. And one of the things that Anonymous was doing was a lot of distributed denial of service attacks, which is not a hack, but they were going after a law firm, ACS Law, that was going after pirates. And basically, with a big DDoS, when the firm put back their website up, they had a misconfiguration, and the emails were available. Anonymous took them and put them on the Pirate Bay. And what it showed was that the law firm was illegally targeting people. This is the first time technology journalists from Wired, from Ars Technica, start to really write stories from these emails. Not from a hack, but soon after, you really start having hackers hack to look for this stuff. This is the period where Chelsea Manning has given cables, not from a hack, as a whistleblower to WikiLeaks. This is important simply because at this point you have Anonymous supporting Assange when Assange was blacklisted by companies for hosting the cables. And at this very moment, you have WikiLeaks, Anonymous, all over the news. They become geopolitically significant. This is important because what they do then gets transmitted to the world. Anonymous continues to be in the news because they get involved in the Arab Spring, but now I'm getting to the pivotal hack that really matters for this story. And it's against a company called HB Gary, and I'm going to show a small clip that's going to help tell the story.
Financial Times article comes out. Suddenly, on February 5th, Financial Times article comes out that we all see. And it's quoting this guy named Aaron Barr, who's the CEO of HP Gary Federal, which is an intelligence contractor. And Aaron Barr is telling this Financial Times journalist, Joseph Min, that he's been secretly monitoring the AnonOps server where all this is going on, and has done so for several weeks, and using his own custom brand of information operations techniques, has managed to identify the alleged leadership of Anonymous, including 25, quote, lieutenants, unquote. The fact of the matter is, what he told Financial Times was, everything he told them was demonstrably untrue, and very much hilariously so.
Now, to put that in hacker terms, Anonymous is a hornet's nest, and Barr said, I'm gonna stick my penis in that thing.
In a mere 24 hours, he was pwned completely by a small group of participants who basically went on a hacking rampage.
Faster than you can say, get these hornets off my penis. Anonymous took down Barr's website, stole his emails, deleted the company's backup data, trashed his Twitter account, and remotely wiped his iPad. And he had just reached the Hammam High level on Angry Birds.
So this was revenge. Anonymous was going after HB Gary for revenge, but basically in the emails was a plan to smear the journalist Glenn Greenwald of The Intercept because Glenn Greenwald supported WikiLeaks. And this is the email. And this is really when people are like, okay, there really is stuff in these emails. What you have next is a breakaway group, LulzSec, who decides to go on a 50-day hacking rampage. They're not really looking for information. They disband, they break up. And then there's another turning point when this young hacker, Jeremy Hammond, decides to form a group called AntiSec, and he is explicitly now trying to use this strategy. He goes after companies such as Stratfor, an intelligence firm, to get the emails. He gives them to WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks publishes them. In these emails is evidence of corporate spying. Now then, what happens next is everyone gets arrested. Anonymous didn't have great security. So the question would be, would this tactic live and die with Anonymous? Well, the answer is no. There was another turning point, because other hacktivists around the world started to use this strategy, and then new groups started to use it. So in Peru, LulzSec Peru broke into the government, got emails that were so damning, the government almost had to disband. Another example is Phineas Fisher, who hacked an Italian company called Hacking Team. I'm going to show a very quick excerpt of a video.
Let's do this.
These are the exact words from our live text exchange, voiced by one of my colleagues.
So why did you hack Hacking Team?
Well, I just read the Citizen Lab reports on Finn Fisher and Hacking Team and thought, that's fucked up. And I hacked them.
What was the goal in hacking the Hacking Team data? Were you trying to stop them?
Well, for the lulz, I don't really expect leaking data to stop a company, but hopefully it can at least set them back a bit and give some breathing room to the people being targeted with their software.
What's interesting is that actually it did have an impact. A lot of people wrote about the emails, and this is an Italian journalist who basically wrote major stories about this to say that there was better proof in the emails. And in fact, a year later, the company lost its license to export surveillance software. So here we see how this style of hacking and leaking was in the public interest and was really established. But then this happened. In 2014, a group by the name of Guardians of Peace, we don't know really where they're from, hacked into Sony pictures. They took movies, they took emails, they took other documents. They first wanted money. When Sony didn't give it to them, they released all this stuff. And there wasn't that much interesting stuff in the emails, a little bit about pay disparities over gender and race. And it was unclear why they were doing it. Some people believed it was the North Korean government. The proof for that was more circumstantial than solid, but it looked like state actors now were starting to use this strategy for different purposes. And this is the moment we have two divergent forms, where today you still have the hacktivists using this. One of the most recent examples was a group called the Decepticons, possibly from Brazil, who hacked into some surveillance companies and released information. But we see also with the DNC hack that possibly state actors are also using this. So now just to finish, very briefly, I want to talk about the implications of this. There's a lot of implications, but I don't have much time, but I'll leave you a couple of things. As an anthropologist, what I'm fascinated by is the fact that, again, this strategy was possible in the 1990s. Content was stored digitally. Hackers were all over the internet breaking into systems. But in some ways, unless something becomes dramatic and visible, it's hard to, without becoming dramatic and visible, it's hard for it to propagate. And Anonymous was really good at creating a really interesting show. And so I think it was through their spectacle and their drama that this form was not invented, but propagated. I think another really interesting element has to do with something called the fog of hacking. There's a term in English called the fog of war, where different groups involved in war try to create confusion so you don't know their strategy or why they're doing a certain operation. Well, this is what's going to be happening and is already happening with hacking and the dumping of data. And there was a good report released by Citizen Lab about hacks and tainted leaks. So we're going to have leaks that also have false information, which we haven't seen so much of before. Attribution is extremely hard in hacking, trying to find out who did what. We've been in an experimental stage. Even the state actors seem to have been clumsy, but I think in the future they're going to get better at what they do, and it's going to be hard to locate the source. And actually, the hacktivists like Phineas Fisher, who has struck a number of different companies, has never been caught. And so they're also going to be good at hiding their tracks. Now, the final question to address is, do these documents acquired by hacking contain information in the public interest? Again, just because I'm calling it a public interest hack does not mean that they're good for the public, just that the public is interested in them. But are they in the public interest as well? Well, it depends. And journalists are really important arbiters in this debate. And I think from the Democratic National Convention email hack and leak, you had some really gossipy, insubstantial stories that I don't think served the public interest. It was just serving clicks and money and bait. They were very gossipy, but there were also stories in the Democratic National Convention emails that I think were substantial. How the Hillary campaign sidelined Bernie Sanders, how the Hillary campaign worked very closely with CNN, right? And so I just don't have any way to pronounce anything universal about these hacks and leaks. In some ways, they have to be assessed each on their own. And what's interesting, and this is how I'm going to end, is that a hack and a leak can be used as a strategy for misinformation, as a strategy to unleash the fog of hacking, but it can also have information that serves the public interest. It's not either or, but can be a hybrid form. So, grazie, and that's it. Okay.